In this oil pastel lesson, we're going to take a look at drawing an apple. I love drawing apples. They're a great subject for learning a new technique or testing out a new medium. They're relatively simple in shape to draw, but there can be some complexities in the shadow and in some of the colors. We're going to start very loosely by drawing out the overall shape of the apple with a bit of an indication for the stem. I'm starting here with a brown oil pastel, and I'm using Sakura Expressionist oil pastels. There's a great variety of color available in this brand of pastel, and they go on the surface very smooth, and you can really layer multiple layers, which is some of the characteristics you look for in a quality oil pastel. Now that we've got that initial application of the brown down with some indication of the shadowed areas, we're going to go back over with a darker red. Now specifically this color is dark rose, and again I'm just concentrating on mostly the darker areas of value. Now most apples of course are not completely red, so we're going to add a little bit of yellow ochre there to add a bit of variety. And I'm going to switch over now to a grayish or muted red, and this specific color is rose gray, so it is a muted version of the red. And at this point we still haven't actually grabbed a true red. Now that we've got a bit of color on the surface, we can start to work to push the value range, and of course the values are the darks and lights within the scene. We want to have a full range of value, meaning we want to have some dark darks, some light lights, and some midtones in between. So we'll use a dark brown initially to establish some of the darker values. And now we can pull out that true red and start working on some of those transition zones that happen between values. Now you may have noticed that I'm doing quite a bit of layering with the oil pastels. When you work with oil pastels, layering is an important part of the process. Layering allows the colors to be built up, creating depth in the color, and it often leads to a more realistic, believable color. Now at this point I'm using a colorless blender. It looks like a white pastel, but it actually is the oil pastel binder without any pigment in it. It allows me to work the pastel that I've already applied into the tooth of the surface of the paper, creating a smoother appearance. Now I'm going to work just a touch of black in a few areas to start to really push those darker values a bit further. And as I do, I want to mention the type of paper that I'm working on. I'm working on Canson Mi-Teintes paper, which is specifically designed for pastel applications. Now there's two sides of the paper. There is a toothier side, which means it's heavily textured, and then there's a slightly smoother side. In this case, I'm working on the slightly smoother side. It still has an ample tooth to accept the oil pastel, but it's not quite as strong as the other side of the paper, which has a heavier tooth. Either side of the paper is of course appropriate to work with. Now after I've applied the black to the surface, I'll work it in with a colorless blender before moving on to the highlighted side of the apple. Now in this case our light source is originating from the upper left hand corner, which means the highlights are going to be the strongest on the left side of the apple. Now of course the exception to this is on the upper right hand side of the apple where the light is hitting the top portion of the apple. So we'll put a few highlights there as well, and I'll go back with the yellow ochre and just make that area a little bit more intense and maybe spread a little bit of the yellow ochre into a couple other areas, especially in the bottom left hand corner of the apple. Now we'll go back again with our true red, and we're just going to create a few marks. Now at this point I'm marking very heavily on the surface because I've built up a good foundation layer of oil pastels. At this point you can see the drawing is starting to resemble a painting, which a lot of times is the end goal of an oil pastel drawing, to make it look like a painting. In fact, the thought process behind using oil pastels is very similar to the thought process behind painting with oil paint. You can build up the color, you can move it around on the surface, you can work other colors into previous applications. It's really quite versatile. And at this stage of the drawing, the marks that we make when they're applied heavily like this are very similar to brushstrokes that you might make into an oil painting. Alright, now let's define the edge of the apple just a bit, but before we go all out on defining the edge of the apple, let's address the cast shadow that happens right underneath and behind the apple. Now you might be tempted to grab that black oil pastel to create the shadow, but it's really better to create a more natural looking shadow. In this case, we'll layer a dark brown and then we'll put a brighter blue over the top. I really want the shadow to feel a bit cooler in color temperature, so I want that blue to show through in the shadow. Now we can go back with the white oil pastel and really define the edges of the apple. You can see here that some of our marks are still pretty stray and loose around the edges of the apple, but by using the white oil pastel we can define the edges. So this is another important thing to keep in mind when you're working with oil pastels. Because of the nature of the oil pastel, because you can layer over previous applications, you can go back and define edges, or you can make them a little bit looser if you prefer. You really have a lot of control over the mark that you make on the surface. And speaking of edges, I want to go back and create a smoother transition between the back edge of that cast shadow and the background. So I'm going to address it again with a bit of the dark brown and blue, and then just take the tip of my finger and lightly smear that edge out a bit. Now moving on to the stem, we're going to start with a bit of burnt sienna just to define the line. Then I'm going to go back with a dark brown and put a bit of shadow on the stem. And then it's on to the highlights. Of course, there'll be a bit of light that's hitting the stem as well, so I'll use white for that. And I can also use that white to clean up the edge and the shape of the stem. Now, with just a very light touch of the black, I'm going to create a little bit of a stronger shadow on the stem. Now, a quick word about black. Black is such a strong color. I would suggest using it in moderation. Now, we've used quite a bit of it in this drawing, but we've done it with a light touch, and we've always done it with a bit of a mixture of another color. Sometimes black can be so strong it can overpower the image or make the image look flat. Now I'm going to add just a bit of olive to that yellow ochre area just to add a little bit of variety. And then we'll make our highlight just a bit stronger. And now I'm going to take a bit of the color pale orange, which is really closer to a cream color, and I'm just going to put a couple of subtle highlights up to the upper portion of the apple here. This subtle highlight will make the apple feel a little bit more three-dimensional. And of course I'm going to work it in here with the colorless blender so that we have a smoother transition between values and it's a bit softer. And now our drawing of an apple completed with oil pastels is complete. I hope this tutorial gave you a few tips, and I hope it helped you out. If you're ready to learn more about drawing, then check out the Secrets to Drawing video course. You can click on the video to learn more about the course, which is the most comprehensive video course available for learning how to draw. We cover everything from the basics like line, shape, form, value, texture, color, and color theory. And we talk about each one of the traditional drawing media, including graphite, pen and ink, charcoal, colored pencils, oil pastels, and soft pastels, all while covering the traditional concepts of portrait drawing, landscape drawing, and figure drawing. You'll learn the core concepts behind seeing as an artist. You'll learn how to draw from observation and draw from photos. Now, there's more than just videos. Ebooks are included with the course as well. Each module includes an illustrated ebook that is taken directly from the video included in the module. It includes images and a written commentary. There are 28 total modules in the course, which include 26 ebooks that total 178 pages. That's over 5 hours of video instruction. I hope you'll check out the Secrets to Drawing video course.